Thank you, thank you. Yeah, and hello everybody. I'm Mustafa bin Nifart, as Stefania kindly mentioned, assistant professor of modern Persian literature and culture. I feel fortunate really to be here joining you all for my dear colleague, Dr. Alexandra Hoffmann's inaugural lecture in the Alireza Ahmadian lecture series. And we are also joined by, am I correct, is Dr. Wonderful. We're joined by our dear colleague in University of Michigan, from University of Michigan, Dr. Cameron Cross. This event is really significant. It marks a sort of a milestone, I would say, in our Iranian and Persianate initiative on the one hand, but also the Alireza Ahmadian lecture series on the other. So I would like to take the opportunity to remember the late Alireza, first of all, and honor his legacy, because it was he and a few of his amazing friends, some of whom actually I'm very much delighted to say that are here now. It was them that for the first time they dreamed and advocated for the initiative, the Iranian and Persianate Studies Initiative. There was nothing before that, but now we're in a different place. I'm also thanking those friends and supporters, and of course the first supporters and donors of our program. Again, some of whom have honored us with their presence tonight here. Without the support of the family and friends of the Alireza Ahmadian, of course, we might not have been able to continue the lecture series, I would say from the second year on, when we started it in 2018, but now it's in its fifth year, I guess. And so far we've had over 50 successful lectures. So my special thanks to the friends and family of Alireza Ahmadian. And finally, I would also like to acknowledge Ross King, last but not least, whose honestly leadership and guidance, and I've had the honor of working with him, his unwavering and unrelenting support has been at the core and foundation of both the initiative and later on the lecture series. And thanks to all of these efforts, I can say tonight that I really don't know at this point of any other department in North America that can, as we do now, boast of 4 tenure track professors in Iranian and Persianate studies. At least I don't know, honestly. Having said all of this, of course, we have a lot of other work to do, but with Alexandra having joined us, we are even more excited and motivated to do our work harder in order to achieve our future goals. And now, the moment we all have been waiting for. With pleasure, I will now again pass it back on to Stefania Burke, who will provide a formal introduction for Dr. Hoffmann, as well as for our esteemed discussant, Dr. Cameron Cross. Thank you once again for being here, and I hope that tonight's lecture will spark insightful thoughts and conversations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mustafa. It is my pleasure to introduce also my colleague, Dr. Hoffmann today. Alexandra joined the Asian Studies Department at UBC in July as the inaugural professor in classical Persian literature and culture. This position was made possible with generous investment from the Iranian Canadian community and UBC, and many of you are here and some may be on Zoom. And I've had the real pleasure to not have to work as hard as Ross, but to get to meet with many of you on various occasions. And I'm thrilled that we're here again this evening for this. Alexandra obtained her master's in Islamic studies from the University of Zurich in Switzerland and a PhD from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago, where she focused on classical Persian literature. In her research, Alexandra examines how pre-modern Persianate poets thought of the interplay between gender, corporeality, and the self in their literary works. Her sources range from epics like the Kushnāmeh to romances like Layli o Majnun, apologies for my butchering. It breaks my heart, and I'm sorry. I did practice, and then I'm nervous and I butcher it, and I apologize. Her scholarly approaches include perspectives from masculinity studies, monster studies, critical race theory, and the history of emotions. She has published on a pre-modern collection of tales known as the Sinbad-Nameh, or the Seven Sages of Rome, highlighting the important role the Persian tradition plays in a global medieval framework. Today, she will share her research insights on the topic of intermixture in Persian epics, the case of Kush, the elephant-eared. Her discussant for today, do we see him? I'm not sure, is Dr. Cameron Ross, Assistant Professor of Iranian Studies, who will be joining us on Zoom. Hello. From the University of Michigan, my alma mater, go Blue Ann Arbor. Sorry. Dr. Cross's research interests broadly fall in the arena of narrative studies, examining questions about language and audience, gender and power, and selfhood and society as explored in Persian, Arabic, Greek, and other literary languages. He is the author of the book Love at a Crux, the New Persian Romance in a Global Middle Ages, from the University of Toronto Press this year, 2023, as well as several articles on comparative epic and amorous tales. Following the lecture by Dr. Hoffmann and the discussant's remarks, there will be time for some questions from the audience. So with that, it is my pleasure to invite Alexandra, Dr. Hoffmann, to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just make sure this is working. Yay. Okay, great. Are we using Winnie? Are you using this mic or this? Let's use both. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Stefania, and thank you so much, Mustafa, for your kind introductions, and to everyone who is working to support this event today. And thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to meet both members of the community, new academic colleagues, and some students are here too. I'm excited about that. And I also welcome people that are joining over Zoom, including my colleague, Cameron Cross. I dedicate this lecture to my late mentor and advisor, Franklin Lewis. He is in my thoughts a lot as I give this first lecture here at UBC. So today, as you know, I will be presenting my research on the Kushnāmeh, which is a chapter from my first book project. Okay, and the good news is that you can read the work in English. The Kushnāmeh has been translated by my colleague Khayr in 2022. I probably have to say a few words of caution. The Kushnāmeh is not a book that you want to read to your children. And today as well, I will be talking about some of the darker aspects of the book, including sexual violence and incest. But actually, I'll begin with another text today, a text that will serve as my introduction into the topic of intermixtures, namely the most famous of the Persian epics, Abul Qasim Ferdowsi's Shāhnāmeh, or Book of Kings, completed at the beginning of the 11th century CE. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Rustam, the most famous mammoth-bodied hero of the Shāhnāmeh, who is incredibly strong, brave, and skilled in combat, slaying in dragons and demons or devs. Rustam is such an iconic character. He continues to inspire artists, for example, in imagining what Rustam's life would look like today. My favorite is Rustam on holidays on the surfboard. So this continued fascination is certainly rooted in admiration for Rustam. Yet although Rustam is easily the most famous warrior of the Shāhnāmeh, he's also not wholly unproblematic in the Persian epic world. And this is because Rustam is a descendant of the evil snake king Zahak from his mother's side. Now, Zahak is a king of Arab heritage who comes to power after making a pact with Iblis, or the devil, to have his father killed. After Iblis kisses Zahak's shoulders, two snakes grow out of them that need to be fed human brain every day. So he doesn't look very evil in this illustration here. He looks a little sad here, imprisoned in Mount Damavand at the end of his reign. But this evil dragon-like king, or in Persian, Shah-e Ajdaha Peykar, is the remnant of the Avestan Ajidahaka, a demon in the form of a three-headed snake. In the Shahnameh, Zahak is human, but becomes a monstrous snake man after his corruption through Iblis. In any case, this fellow is Rostam's great-grandfather. So Rostam is on one side descended from a family of Iranian warriors, and the other side goes back to Zahak, the Arab king turned snake monster. So Rostam is the result of an intermixture of two very different lineages. And related to intermixture are two words that are very important in the Shahnameh, and that is the word nejad, which means lineage, and gohar, which means essence. In the Shahnameh, nejad is on the one hand used to separate the Iranian nobility from commoners. It is Iranian warriors and king who are said to have a good lineage, or farokh nejad. On the other hand, nejad also demarcates foreignness and the demonic, as in the case of the Zahakians, who are bad nejad or of bad lineage. So nejad is something that connotes Iranianness, class, and to a certain extent, it also predetermines character. And in the Shahnameh, Rostam's hybrid lineage is perceived as a somewhat risky affair. When Zal and Rudabeh, Rostam's parents, first fall in love, there are considerable concerns. As we know, Rostam's mother Rudabeh is a descendant of Zahak, but Zal, Rostam's father, is a somewhat problematic character as well. He is the son of Sam and a renowned Iranian warrior, but he is born, and I quote, with a black body and hair like white jasmine. Siyah peykar muye sar chon saman. His father calls him a child of a div, or demon, and abandons him in the wilderness, where he is brought up by the mythical bird Simor. So he too is a somewhat non-normative figure in the poem. As a consequence, there is considerable anxiety around the marriage of Zal and Rudabeh among the Iranian nobility, because they are worried about the outcome of the intermixture of lineages, or nejad. Zal's father Sam, for example, thinks, "Az in morg parvarde van divzad, chegune barayat chegui nejad." From one raised by a bird, and he's referring to his son Zal here, and the descendant of a div, referring to Rudabeh, what would you say? What kind of nejad will emerge? Similarly, the Iranian king Manuchehr does not give them permission to marry at first, because, as he says, from Mehrab's daughter and Sam's son, here referring to Rudabeh and Zal, a sharp sword will be unsheathed. By this, he means the future offspring. On one side, it will not be from our gohar. How can antidote and poison be mixed together? If the child is inclined towards its mother, his head will be filled with bad speech. He will fill the land of Iran with tumult and trouble, so that perhaps crown and treasure will be opened to him. So King Manuchehr fears that the coupling of Zal and Rudabeh could give rise to a hero who could have the potential to destroy the kingdom. However, in the end, as astrologers foresee a fortunate future, the marriage may take place, and in due time, Rostam is born. In both of these quotes, we have seen some concerns about nejad, or lineage, and gohar, or essence, as something that needs protection against intermixture. So there is some tension within the Shahnameh, which on the one hand condemns anything associated with Sahak and his legacy. And on the other, it elevates Rostam as the foremost champion of Iran. The Shahnameh's famous warrior is a figure in which a drop of the demonic other is already mixed in. And perhaps it is this very state of hybridity that makes Rostam so exceptional, so massive, and so strong. So where intermixture with the demonic results in an extraordinary hero, Rostam, in the Shahnameh, Irānshāh ibn Abi Khayr's Kushnāmeh shows that intermixtures can also produce very different results. So let's shift to the Kushnāmeh. It's a text written about 100 years after the Shahnameh. Like other texts from the Persian epic cycle, the Kushnāmeh features some of the same characters as the Shahnameh, and is thus a text in conversation with the epic world of the master narrative, the Book of Kings. Kush's story is situated during the reign of the snake king Zahak, as well as the legitimate heirs to the Iranian throne, namely Feridun and his offspring. And unfortunately, we only have one single copy of the Kushnāmeh, and it is very sparsely illustrated, so we do not have an image of Kush. So this is also not Kush, but perhaps this will give us an idea of what he might have looked like. So I will argue that in Kush's case, the intermixture of lineages produces a monster. And it will show you what consequences this has for his sexuality and how that connects him to Zahak and Persianate devs or demons. And I also have an interpretation for the surprising turn of events at the end of the book. And this is me trying to build suspense, so you won't leave halfway through. But first, let's get to know Kush a little bit more. The story begins when the Snake King Zahak sends his brother, Kush Senior, yes, he's also named Kush, to extinguish the remnants of the Iranian royal lineage. During his travels, Kush Senior comes across the elephant-eared people, or the Pil-Gushan. So he chooses to fight them instead. He can't find the Iranians, so he chooses to fight the Pil-Gushan. And among them is a girl who is beautiful, tall, and enchanting. He falls in love with her, and in due time, their child is born. But Kush Senior is horrified at the sight of it. دو دندان خوک و دو گوش آن پیل، سر و موی سرخ و دو دیده چو نیل، میان دو کتفش نشانی سیاه، سیاه چون تن مردم پرگناه. مر او را بدید و بترسید سخت، به زن گفت که ای بدرگ شوربخت، همی آدمی زاید از مرد و زن، تو چون زاده ای بچه اهرمن. Two boar tusks and two ears like those of an elephant, a red head of hair, two eyes like indigo. Between his shoulders, a black sign, black like the body of sinful people. He saw him and got mighty frightened. He said to his wife, "You ill-fated, ill-bred one, from a man and a woman, a human is born. Then why did you give birth to Ahriman's child?" Kush Senior draws his sword and mercilessly kills her. And then he takes the child and leaves it in a forest to die. Except, spoiler alert, the child doesn't actually die because that's Kush Jr., so we'll get to that in a bit. So I just briefly want to note that despite his unusual features, baby Kush is not quite unique, a quite unique creature in Persianate literature or even in Islamic literature more generally. Although we not have an illustration of Kush himself, his physique is perhaps similar to the Pil-Gushan, the elephant-eared people, or the Gelim-Gushan, the carpet-eared people, found in works on the wonders of creation, or the Ajaib al-Makhluqat, which are sometimes called the monstrous races in medieval European scholarship. These Ajaib al-Makhluqat inhabit the edges of the Perso-Islamic world symbolizing their perceived distance from civilization and humanity. Now, Kush is often described as possessing a bad lineage or bad nijat. And what does that mean in his case? As the son of Zahak's brother and a woman from the Pil-Gushan, the elephant-eared ones, Kush indeed possesses a lineage that is intermixed with the demonic and perhaps the racial other. So the question for Kush is then, well, how does he function as a character that is so visually different with such a mixture of lineages in an epic world? How is he integrated into a narrative that shares many of the same values and conceptions of kingship as the Shahnameh? In order to answer this question, let's look a bit more closely at the story. So baby Kush is found by Iranians hiding from Zahak, namely Abtin and his Iranian exile army. They raise him, but little Kush is not an easy child. He is tough and self-centered, he beats up all the other children, and he doesn't learn anything at school. And the teacher goes to complain to Abtin, he only says, just keep away from him, he's a Div Zad, he's the offspring of a demon. He has a hard heart, a bad nature, and an ugly face, so you know that he has the character of hell. So in the opinion of Kush's foster father, Kush's ugliness and his bad character go hand in hand. Kush's true skills become obvious when he's a little bit older, when he starts to hunt and fight. Soon nobody dares to match him on the battlefield. Kush, the ugly Div Zad, is perhaps unsurprisingly quite the fighter. And this is also the reason why Kush's father, who is now king of China, invites Kush Jr. to join him and his army when he learns that his monstrous son is still alive. Kush Jr. abandons the Iranians and joins his father's army instead. However, the troops aren't very happy about Kush joining them. Everyone said, "What is this Div? Indeed cheesed. One must cry for our country. He's surely not a person. He is Ahriman, or the devil. He has the face of Ahriman in the form of an elephant. If this black Div becomes our king, the army must lead itself, because from this face, nothing but evil comes. His face does not possess the divine Far." It is evident in this comment that the troops' elders associate Kush's appearance with Divs, Ahriman, blackness, and evil. So for the army, Kush's visual alterity is a reason for concern. Such an ugly Div must have an evil character and certainly cannot become king. He lacks the Far, the royal aura that is bestowed by God upon kings. Except Kush does become king of China after his father's death. And after many, many battles, he is eventually defeated when Fereydun, the son of Abtin, takes over Zahak's throne. Now, Fereydun's opinion of Kush-e-Pilgush is similar to other characters we have encountered so far, but he mentions something that is worth exploring further. This is what he says about Kush. Fereydun said, this Div born is from a seed or tochem. May that seed never exist. A son who killed his father with a hard blow for a fleeting palace. His nature is harsh and his character is bad. Someone who has brains can see beforehand that a snake will find its own essence, or gohar, if you make it sleep by your side. So Fereydun is talking about Kush here when he is referring to the Div born, but the seed or tochem to which he refers is actually that of Zahak, right? Because Kush didn't kill his father. It was, after all, Zahak who agreed to have his father killed in order to become ruler of Iran. So technically speaking, it's also not Zahak's tochem or seed that lives on in Kush, since Zahak is his paternal uncle. So what seed is he referring to? there may be a hint that this bad seed goes back further than Zahak. And indeed, in a way, it does. And I'd like to preface my discussion of the shared bad seed of Kush and Zahak with a brief detour to monster studies. As Jeffrey Jerome Cohen posits, and I quote, any kind of alterity can be inscribed across the monstrous body, but for the most part, monstrous difference tends to be cultural, political, racial, economic, or sexual, end quote. The category of the monstrous shares many traits with the results of race-making, including the attribution of an exaggerated and threatening sexuality. Both Kush and Zahak share such a sexuality, like Cohen's monsters that are, and I quote again, transgressive, too sexual, perversely erotic, or lawbreakers, end quote. So both Kush and Zahak share a kind of sexual deviousness, a monstrous sexuality that is marginal in the Shāhnāmeh, but far more prominent in the Kushnāmeh. In the Shāhnāmeh, we learn, for example, that Zahak takes possession of beautiful girls and makes them attend to him personally, a custom which the narrator describes as not royal. In all likelihood, sexual favors are involved. In the Kushnāmeh, we hear that Kush takes away beautiful women from their husbands, abducts children, both male and female. The text doesn't say what for, but I think we can imagine that it is for sexual exploitation. But the similarities between Kush and Zahak run deeper than this. What they have in common is incestuous desires. Now, Mahmoud Omid Salar has explored Zahak's before life, that is, his depiction in Avestan and Pahlavi works that predate the Shāhnāmeh and the Kushnāmeh. And in the Pahlavi Daristani Denig, for example, Zahak commits incest with his mother, an adulterous demon. I read you the translation, which is unfortunately very old, but I think it's the only one we have. So, it is adultery, heinous and vicious, which first Zahak used to commit. And he is known by the illicit intercourse, which was his desire with Vadak, who was his mother in the lifetime of Arurvadasp, who was his father, without the authority of Arurvadasp, who was the husband of Vadak, whose practicing of sin unauthorizedly and injudiciously was itself heinous and very frequent. Text also states that Vadak, which is Zahak's mother, was an evildoer of sin, by whom adultery was first committed, and by it all lineage disturbed and control put an end to. Without the authority of the husband, an intermingling of son and son occurs. So it is clear that in both these passages, we are not talking about Zoroastrian close kin marriage, but adultery, or what we now would say incest, that leads to a kind of instability of lineage. Now, in the Shāhnāmeh, there is only an elliptical suggestion about the sexual relationship between Zahak and his mother. After Iblis has convinced Zahak that he must kill his father, Ferdowsi states that even among lions, if a male child has a bad character, it will not dare spill its father's blood unless, he says, there be some other hidden cause. For those who look, the secret is from the mother's side. Magar dar nehanash sakhun digar ast, pajouhande ra raz ba madar ast. So Ferdowsi is not explicit about this, but the memory of Zahak's incestuous relationship with his mother is still there in the oral tradition. Okay, so now back to Kush. Kush also has some disturbing incestuous desires, and I think one example will suffice for you today. It begins when Kush's beloved wife, Nigarin, dies in childbirth. Kush grieves deeply for her, so much so that he almost loses his mind. Still remembering his first love, Nigarin, he then falls in love with his daughter. He called his daughter again and again because she looked just like her mother. He called her only Mahcher, moon-faced, as the moon and sun were ashamed of her light. Out of love for her, Kush's heart turned senseless, and his head was full of turbulence once again. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, Kush's daughter rejects him, although he tries to persuade her repeatedly. And after a while, Kush finds out that he is actually in love with a young man at court. Then Kush tricks his daughter into revealing the lover's identity by pretending that he has overcome his incestuous desires. He says, "Now that this desire has left my heart, I won't speak of the unspeakable to you again. Kunun as dilam dur gasht on havas, naguyamat naguftani zin sepas." Instead, he suggests he's looking for a husband for her. But when she asks to be married to her secret lover, Kush has him killed immediately. Having decapitated her lover, he then hangs the corpse's head around her neck and makes her wear it. His daughter cries over her bitter fate and lives under the constant threat of incest until she finally passes away. And this episode ends with Kush's son being so terrified of his father's conduct that he flees to Zahak's court and begs him not to send him back. So I think it's remarkable that even Zahak, whose snakes require their daily brain by now, is understanding of the boy's situation and agrees to keep him. So in this example, and this scenario repeats itself, we see Kush's obsessive love with Nigarin that he tries to reproduce with his daughters and other women. As morally wrong as these passages are by virtue of their narration of incestuous desire, obsessive love, and even murder, they nevertheless reveal a frighteningly human side to Kush. We do not only see his ugly exterior, but also are shown his inner emotional life. And the uncomfortable thing about monstrosity is that it often seems strangely familiar to us, despite its apparent distance from all things human. The monster, after all, at closer examination, comes from within us. After this sinister remark, let's get back to Kush. Kush actually does regret his actions, and he blames himself for what has happened. Nushan, his vizier, for example, tells him, "Bad character has come as your nature. One can't set you free of it. You cannot get away from nature and constitution, not from that which God has given you as your destiny." So Kush's incestuous desires, monstrous sexuality, and gendered violence are seen as a consequence of his evil nature, which, as the vizier implies, is an aspect of his essential self that he cannot escape. So in the case of Zahak, as well as Kush, monstrosity seems to accompanied with a form of sexual deviance that seems to be innate or part of their nature, a shared deviousness that is perhaps linked to their common corrupted lineage. And it is perhaps no accident that both of them are frequently called devs or demons in the text, although they are not really devs. Devs or demons, just like other male monsters in other parts of the world, often exhibit a threatening sexuality. Persianate devs, as far as visual evidence is available, are often portrayed as monstrously sexual through exposed genitalia. And I thought as some sort of fun intermezzo and to give you a little bit of a break, let's look at some pictures. We will begin with Sasanian magic seals. So I think we're not quite sure what their purpose is, and we're also not quite sure who they depict. But we can see that the creatures on these seals, whether it's a masked man, an archdemon, or a Sasanian hero fighting a demonic being, they're all figures that are distinctly sexualized humanoid beings. And if you jump ahead a few centuries, the Siyah Kalem album, which was assembled in Tabriz in the 15th century, features a group of images with demonic iconography as well. And these divs, hybrids of animal features and the humanoid body, also show exposed genitalia. When we get to the Kushnāmeh, and of course, these are miniatures, so I blew them up a little because otherwise they're a little small. We see Francesca Leoni argues that Persianate divs acquired a distinct sexual identity in book illustrations with Shah Tahmasp, Kushnāmeh, as we can see here with the Akwan div flinging Rostam into the sea. Or here, when Rostam kills the white div, as Francesca Leoni writes, and I quote, "Divs are barely dressed. At most, they are sheltered by short skirts held by belt-like scarves, which were at some point in time split along their middle in order to reveal their sexual nature," end quote. So Kush is not a div, and we do not have any illustrations of him. But there are parallels between Kush and these divs in that they both possess a kind of monstrous and threatening sexuality. However, and now we return to the narrative and the promised surprise. Under all this monstrosity is a creature that can be transformed quite literally into a man. In a truly surprising turn of events, Kush, the elephant-eared tyrant, undergoes a radical transformation. At the end of the book, Kush has become such a powerful ruler that he is convinced that he is God. One day, he gets lost in a forest and comes upon a castle where an old man lives. Kush tells the old man that he is in fact God and that he has lost his way and he would like a way out, please. The old man finds this very funny and says like, "Hi, you're God and you've lost your way and you're so ugly." And he says to Kush, "Agar to khudavandi ay tir hoosh, chera bar nadari to dandan o goosh?" Like, if you're God, you dim-witted one, why don't you remove your tusks and ears? Kush is not very impressed with the man's words because in fact, he's quite upset about how he looks. He says, "Since I have by origin such a nature, how should I relinquish my ugly ways? I would be satisfied if I did not have this wealth and my heart was not in pain due to this ugliness of mine." So Kush himself sees his nature as determining his ugly ways. Ayin here could refer to behavior or perhaps even religion. And he also shows that he suffers from this ugliness and would gladly trade in his wealth and status for it. Well, eventually, the old man takes pity and suggests to not only remove the bad mark, the nishane bad, from his face, but also to illuminate his soul and heart and show him the creator. The first step for this double remedy is for Kush to only eat fruit. Then Kush becomes thin and weak and recognizes that a god could not feel like this, and therefore, indeed, he cannot be God. And then he is ready to learn about the creator. The second step is the actual makeover. Pas on pire dana bene rang o rai hami chare avard ba ou be jay. Do dandan o do goosh ou taze kad, be sohan o daru be andaze kad. خورش داد تا تنش نیرو گرفت رخ کهربا رنگ نیکو گرفت. Then the sage old man with magic spells and wisdom put in place a remedy for him. he remade his tusks and 2 ears. With a file and medicine, he made them appropriate in size. He fed him so that his body gained strength, and his amber cheeks took on a good color. So, the old man, with the help of some magic, some medicine, and a file, transforms Kush's monstrous exterior. The old man teaches Kush about God, and after a while, Kush is ready to go back on his way and returns to his kingdom. There, he becomes a just ruler and calls the people to the worship of God. And thus, at the very end of the story, the narrator tells us, Kush has left behind his evil ways and wolfish nature, rahibad or. But more than that, Kush also stays away from his former sexual transgressions. He did not usurp anybody's things, neither did he mingle with children and women. With that, Kush's transformation is complete. He's not only rid of his elephant ears and tusks, but he's also abandoned his monstrous sexuality. So all the markers that have constituted him as other, his visual alterity, his monstrous sexuality, and his idolatrous religion are all gone. So how do we interpret this transformation? If we think of the Kushnāmeh as drawing on the imagery of hybridity, like in Rustam, a state that is somewhat stable, the Kushnāmeh allows its protagonist to go through a metamorphosis. With Kush's transformation, it becomes apparent that Kush's body and his monstrosity is not as fixed and as permanent as the text has led us to believe. We have to acknowledge that, like in medieval European literary works, that the body begins to look profoundly flexible and plastic and perhaps a little unstable. In similar way, Kush's monstrosity is inherited, going back to his mixed lineage or nejad between Zahakians and elephant-eared people, and his monstrous body is able to change as well. And at this point, I'd like to make a connection to the scholarship of Geraldine Heng, who has worked extensively on pre-modern race, because I think the parallels to race highlight the intersectionality and essentialism going on here. So Geraldine Heng, in her monograph, The Invention of Race in the European Middle Ages, understands racialization as a hierarchical mechanism that relies on selectively essentialized differences. And Heng also argues that pre-modern race is impermanent, unstable, and unfixed as it merges with other systems like class, gender, sexuality, and religion. So perhaps Kush's monstrosity, which is based on nejad, does the same work as race making. So we perhaps even can understand Kush's transformation not only as a metamorphosis of an unstable, monstrous body, but maybe even as a deracialization. So bear with me for a minute. In the context of a 14th century Middle English romance called The King of Tars, Geraldine Heng writes about the connection of race and religion functioning as a single indivisible discourse. In The King of Tars, she writes, religion, in her case it is Christianity, religion possesses the power to reshape biological fleshly matter upon conversion. And I think something similar is going on in the Kushnāmeh. At the end of the narrative, Kush is fully integrated into a community. Having found the right religion, is said what that is, he is made to look like other characters. Kush's transformation thus evokes parallels with stories abundant in the global Middle Ages, wherein bodily changes occur as a consequence of conversion, even if the process is usually more often instigated by miracle rather than by surgery, and even if Kush's conversion is somewhat reluctant initially. But let's look at some other examples. In Jalal ad-Din Rumi's Masnavi Ma'navi, for example, a black slave or ghulam turns white through the Prophet Muhammad's touch. The slave in question becomes a believer and then is deracialized by prophetic miracle. Here it says, then Mustafa rubbed his blessed hand upon his face and made him fortunate. The black Abyssinian-born one turned white like the full moon, and his night became bright day. Similarly, in Abdurrahman Jami's Nafahat al-Uns, there is a report about the 9th century mystic, Duwannun. Duwannun is reported to have said, I saw a black slave in the desert. Whenever he said Allah, he would turn white. Duwannun says, whoever makes mention of God in reality, his attribute separates from him. As Michelle Quay has argued, the slave's black skin is seen as an attribute or sifat rather than an essential quality. In her words, a quality that can be shed whilst in communion with the divine. What is important for my purposes here is again the combination of race and religion that we see in Persianate texts as well. Now, whether we consider Kush's difference as monstrosity or as race, it is clear that his conversion facilitates a normalization of his character. It shows that Kush is not bound by the predetermination of his mixed lineages, that in a way, religion can overcome nijad. With that, it's time for some conclusions. So to sum up, I've examined the figure of Kush through various intersecting and overlapping perspectives, drawing parallels between constructing a monster and race making. I think both processes do the same work in that they essentialize certain features and work with some of the same stereotypes, such as visual difference and sexuality. However, as we have seen at the end of the text, Kush's visual alterity, his monstrous sexuality, gendered violence, and his idolatry all eradicated upon his conversion. It's thus not only the conceptions of bodies that are somewhat unstable, but also conceptions of alterity, monstrosity, and maybe race. We have also seen that the Shahnameh tends to maintain that nijad, lineage, and gohar, essence, are categories that define a person. Whereas the Kushnāmeh shows that Kush can in fact overcome his mixed lineage and his evil nature through conversion. Now, one can only speculate as to whether and how societal circumstances influenced Irānshāh's poem. However, the unusual end of the Kushnāmeh points to a concern that a Persianate audience of the early 12th century may have had, namely the question of how racially or ethnically diverse people can fit into an imagined community. The Kushnāmeh charts out just such a situation. Through the power of religion, or rather the correct faith, Kush is eventually demonstrified and is integrated into the normative ranks of the Persianate epic world. So to conclude, the inevitability of nijad that is so prominent in the Shahnameh proves to be more flexible in the Kushnāmeh. If one follows the right religion, the right lineage does not matter all that much. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoffmann, for that very intriguing talk. And also it was a reminder of the tradition of Naqali and, oral storytelling for Shahnameh. The way you performed it, I really enjoyed it. That was fantastic. Thank you. Wasn't it? Yeah. Thank you so much. So at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Cameron Cross to please join us officially by, starting his comments, questions, or we very much look forward to your contributions, Dr. Cross. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, salam bar hamagi. It's such a pleasure to be here and I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but it's I'm honored to be a part of this discussion from afar. And I have just a few framing or opening questions. I think that probably the floor should be given to those of you in the audience. So I have maybe one or two questions, one specific to the text and one about the context a little bit more, about the literary tradition. And if you would like, I can ask some follow-ups. But let me start by asking a quick question that came to mind while listening through your talk, Alexandra, where you brought up, I thought you explored so beautifully the highly intersectional dynamic between race and, I loved this word, deviousness, kind of monster making, the way it intersects with things like lineage, sexual excess, sins such as killing of kin, of brothers or fathers, and of idolatry. And another interesting connection you brought up, it was the connection between race and place. Specifically when you mentioned the Ajoyab al-Makhluqat genre. And it reminded me how so much of the theater of action of the Kushnāmeh takes place in that kind of realm of where you find Ajoyab and Gharoyab, wonders and marvels, such as, much of it takes place in Chin and Machin. And then in the second half of Kush's career, he's recalled to the army so that he can fight with the Zanj, which in what would be considered sub-Saharan Africa, and then he makes a detour off to Andalus, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was just kind of curious to hear you expand some of these insights that you've already laid around the kind of imagined community, the encounter with diversity. Do you see any kind of connection with this idea of the demonstrification possible within conversion and the way that it seems to envision geography, or how that relation or how that possibility plays out in geographical terms?
Thank you so much for your question, Cameron. I think it's an excellent point to bring up the geography of Ajaib. Because as you say, they tend to inhabit like the edges of the Persianate imagination, and Chin and Machin, where most of the story of the first half of the book plays out, is kind of far away from Iran itself. Since the Iranians, fled and were hiding in a forest in China, and Kush Senior goes around looking for them, and all he can find is those Pilgushan. And it's an interesting thought of bringing in those ajaib into the community, into the epic community, because otherwise they're quite separate, right? In other literary works, they tend not to be part of the main story. They just tend to be encountered while the hero travels around, and then he leaves them again, and just they remain where they are at the edges of whatever. But here he is adopted by Iranians, and he's brought up within, this Iranian community. And I think in that way, I think he's certainly a unique character in that he doesn't remain at the edges, but he's made part of this community, that he only fits in at the very end.
You mentioned also the kind of integration of Ajoyab topoi into epic material, and of course I couldn't help but think of Sikandar in the Shahnameh of Alexander, and there too there's an interesting connection that maybe we can explore further, because Sikandar also is sort of this hovering presence over the Kushnāmeh. So I'll bracket that point to maybe return to. And now another point that I'll bracket or like sort of pin there that we might also think about is thinking about this kind of eschatological or like the ways that this might be read eschatologically. I was thinking about how the peoples of Gog and Magog, or Ya'juj and Ma'juj, are also described as Pilgushan, that they too have giant ears that they sleep in and wrap themselves in, and that too like seems to be an interesting kind of correspondence. But putting pins in those things, my other kind of big question I'd love to hear you speak about is again, like kind of Kush's place in, I mean, he's such a unique character, but he has so much in common with many other epic and romantic heroes from the same time period, roughly. Talking like the, basically from the Shahnameh to, from Ferdowsi to Nizami, from the around the year 1000 to the year 1200. And some connections that I thought of when you're talking about these intersectional dynamics, such as lineage and hybridity. There's a huge range of hybrid, or shall we say, like mixed characters in the Shahnameh, ranging from highly positive, such as Siavash, his son Kay Khosrow, who's slightly more ambivalent in my eyes, but also generally considered quite positive. Rostam, as you mentioned in your talk, who's famously the poison and the antidote of Iran, all the way down to a king like Hormozd, who's the daughter or the son of Nushin Ravan and the daughter of China, or the princess of China, and a very negative character. And oftentimes it's ascribed to his lineage. Another interesting thing is sexual desire, such as, and we see like stories of sexually indulgent kings such as Khosrow Parviz or Bahram Gur, who in their own stories of like Khosrow and Shirin or the Half Pekar, seem to have this kind of like metamorphosis from within, very similar to what you described with Kush, that they sort of realize that they've been guided by their havas, by their caprice, and that they sort of tame that inner soul and in a way not so far away from Molana, sort of grow into a new station of humanity. And even incest has like some interesting comparisons with like Homai, the daughter slash, what would that be? Sister of Bahman,
Daughter, maybe?
Bahman Ardashir. Or the story of Visa Ramin, which is this written through with incestuous motifs. And there it's not necessarily a deal breaker. You know, it's like, as you pointed out, sometimes the incest is simply, really, it's all about adultery and kind of the connections with lineage. So in any case, there's all these interesting characters that we could connect these with. And I was curious to see if you found that the story of Kush either responds to characters from previous texts, such as the Shahnameh, or does it anticipate themes that we see in other poets in the region, such as Nizami in particular, that you think would be interesting to explore, or help shed further light on Irānshāh's project in a sense?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question, Cam. It's as always your
it was very long-winded. I apologize.
A big treasure troves of ideas right here, which is wonderful. I have some disconnected thoughts. I'll just start putting them together. Maybe you have further thoughts as well. I think, as you mentioned, I think like Kush's conversion or his inner development is very unusual within the epic world. It's really something that doesn't happen in the Shahnameh. It doesn't happen, at least to my knowledge, in other epics either. So I think in a way, it could be a forerunner to other genres that start being produced more with time, like the romance genre, or also Erfan, right? Which comes into being a bit later, where you really have this mystic conversion and realization and subduing of the inner beast. So I think it is possible that there are some connections that, maybe this shifts the gears into different ways than the Shahnameh did. And it is
strangely, if I may interrupt for a moment, it strangely seems highly romantic, despite its very strong epic flavor, like almost like this interesting fusion of it's almost like telling us a romance story, a story such as what a poet like Nizami will later tell through the genre of epic, because a similar kind of conversion motif also, I think I agree. I think going through all the cases of the Shahnameh, there's many things that will affect a character's behavior, but there's it's hard to think of an example where somebody really has this kind of, new life, right? But Viso Ramin has such an transformation. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, and yeah, the only thing that really I always wonder, is it really about Kush's inner development? Because as you know, I think 90% of the text is just Kush, being gruesome and killing and I don't know what. And then, the last very thin slice of the book is like, oh, then he meets his peer and he reforms and now he's like that. So maybe it doesn't feel like a romance quite yet, but as you point out, right, it's an epic that, maybe is on the way to being a romance.
Yeah, well, even I mean, I remember we have a good mutual colleague, Austin O'Malley, who is very interested in the half-pay cat and this sort of so-called transformation that Bahram Gur experiences after going through the story of the seven domes, or the seven stories told in seven pavilions, and a standard reading of the story is that it's like through this training he receives by hearing the stories, he sort of comes out a reformed person. And I remember Austin just saying, like, I don't see any change. He's doing the same thing. He's just let his kingdom like fall apart. It's more like kind of a salvation from. It's like the story of the shepherd and his unfaithful dog that like sort of turns the switch for him. But it's very much, I think it seems to support the message that these things truly are not fully within human power. Like there has to be some sort of enayat, you might call, like a kind of grace from above for it to happen. Anyways, I feel like I've been quite verbose, and I appreciate all your answers. I can certainly pose more questions, but I'll stop for now.
Thank you so much, Cam. Your questions are, as always, really insightful and a joy to think with. So thank you so much for coming today, virtually.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Cross, for joining us and for your insightful comments and questions. I'm not sure how much time we have.
Not much.
Okay, any questions from the audience here? Coming from a more modern background, I myself was, if there is time, I just had a very quick question about sort of the implications of the conclusion, especially for our time, especially for our multicultural society, considering all the themes of racial and lineage, intermixture, and of course, transformation of Kush, right? How do you see the narratives from the Kushnāmeh resonating or challenging contemporary discussions on race, identity, and cultural heritage? I know this is a very huge topic, but if you were to, I don't know, to your undergraduate students, if they ask, okay, why should we read this now, right? Or so, yeah. Anyway, if you feel like, because there's little time, right? Yeah. Anyways.
Thank you. I would tell them because there's monsters in it. You should read it because of that. Yeah, I think it's.
It might be some aspect that you, because of the nature of the project, you might not even have had to yet ponder or think about. So I'm just, wondering, really. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one way. I think for me, the purpose or the excitement of reading such texts is always to see how did people, in the 12th century deal with some of the similar problems that we may still have today, and what was their solution and what were their thoughts at the time. And I think, if we are based in a thought world where Nejad is very important, as in the Shahnameh, as in, being Iranian and all that, and what do you do when all of a sudden you have a mixture of all kinds of people, as in like the Shahnameh laments at its very end, that everything gets mixed up, right? So this seems to present a kind of solution to that problem that is
Kushnāmeh.
The Kushnāmeh seems to present a solution to that problem.
A simplified one, right? Like a
Of
very-
course, of course. Yeah, yeah.
like an
mhm.
abracadabra kind of thing. Yeah, but no, wonderful. I mean,
Yeah,
what
mm.
you do, like what you've done, of course, you do it wonderfully well. So you don't have to, I guess, in your book, talk about the implications. That was just my curiosity. Thank you so much again,
Sure.
Dr. Hoffmann. Thank you so much again, Dr.
Mhm.
Kush.
Thank you.
And of course, thanks to the audience. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I guess at this point, Stefania, do we have anything else to
There's
mention? So-
there is one question apparently.
Oh, there's,
Yeah.
okay. It just appeared, right? Yeah, okay.
Okay, all right. Could you expand on the effect of these stories that may have an origin in millennia-old attitudes of Persian superiority and anti-Blackness that still plagues large numbers of Iranians, both back home and our diaspora? Okay. Okay, so I'd read the question, but now I need to actually understand it. Yeah, so it's a good question. I think Kush as a monster is not quite racialized in the same way as Black people in the same epic are, because as Cameron mentioned before, there are actually Zangis or people from sub-Saharan Africa in the epic as well. So Kush goes on a campaign to fight them, and they're racialized in very horrible stereotypes. So I think this is another category of racialization that we see there that doesn't quite match with what is happening with Kush, who is more of this monstrous, excessive sexuality. So unfortunately, it is something that is quite prevalent in pre-modern Persianate literature, as in many other pre-modern literatures as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffmann. Any other questions?
Okay, read it for me, most
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
All right, it seems to be a longer one. Okay. I tried to teach my students how to summarize and let's see. All right. Except they're actually read the whole thing. As far as Kush's similarity to other, and by the way, this question is from Khayr.
Oh, hello, Kaveh.
The translator of Kushnāmeh. Thanks for doing that. So as far as Kush's similarity to other epic heroes, I think one key to this is the fact that he's both monstrous and outside the geographically familiar world. Not just this story being set in China, but in Sicilia and Iberia. And narratively, his story runs around the edges of the primary Shahnameh heroes, Faridun, etc. And a kind of weird echo or reflection of the real, oh, it disappeared. Oh, it went to sorry.
Real
kind of weird echo. Are you following?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. Weird echo or reflection of the real heroes. A distorted, faint mirror. That geographical displacement seems to be Irānshāh's intervention into an older story of Kush. So I wonder if you've thought about what antecedents or precursors to the text might be, and how that might help us understand Kush. Would you like, if you want to?
We can put it there. Yeah, I think I have the question in mind. Thank you, Kaveh. It's a difficult question. I think, as as we mentioned with the discussion of ajaib and kind of their liminality, also in terms of geography, like they inhabit the edges of Iranian or Persianate imagination. And I don't think Kush is born in Basila, or he's born in Chin, I think. So he's not quite as far away, but of course you're right. He goes from Basila to sub-Saharan Africa and then to Al-Andalus, all of which are very peripheral to where Persian epics usually take place. Now, in terms of other figures that precede his character, I really don't have a good answer for you right now, other than re-mentioning the figure of Iskandar or Alexander, who also travels into these far edges of the world, and who still remains a hero. Of course, he comes from, within the more central lands as being half Iranian, half from Rome. So he's not quite the same. I'm not sure. I think I'll have to think. I'll have to think more about your question. But I'm happy to talk more with you about this as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffmann. Speaking of which, oh yes. Oh, you raised his hand. All right. Sorry. Yeah, I have to look at yeah, because sure. Please go ahead, Dr. Kress.
I can, if there's no other questions. I just thought I'd piggyback off of what Alexandra was just saying.
Please.
Yeah, I think the connection with Alexandra is super, super interesting, because one of my big, one of the strangest puzzles about the Kushnāmeh for me is its really, really complex frame tale in which Sikandar plays this central role. So correct me if I'm wrong, but here's my reconstruction of what I think goes on. It begins with another person named Kush at war with the king of Rome, Caesar, and Caesar gives him tribute consisting of some books. And in the book, Kush reads about the story of Sikandar traveling through China, or Khayr, where he meets, going back to the question of racialization, he meets some dark-skinned cannibals and a statue with a different Kush's name inscribed on it. And this causes Alexander to want to know more about Kush. And so he asks so he meets a man who is a descendant of Jamshid, and he says, "We were the people that never sought vengeance against Sahak. We just turned to God and have lived as hermits ever since then." And Alexander is really interested, and so the descendant of Jamshid gives Alexander the book of Kush, which is now what the story that Alexandra explained for us. And so it has this almost like a Mobius strip. Like, where does this even, which Kush are we talking about as we get further and further into the text? But clearly there's something, I know doesn't exactly go back to Kave's question about previous stories of Kush exactly, but this idea of Alexander being interwoven, he's like the book of Kush, reading about Alexander, reading about Kush. There's something really interesting going on there. And it's a terrible question to pose, because how does one make sense of this? But it's a fascinating thing problem to wrestle with. I don't know if you've been thinking about that particular aspect of Alexander vis-a-vis Kush in the frame tale, but I think there's something going on there that's quite interesting.
Definitely. I think Kaveh has thought a little bit about it. So
I'm sure that the three of you could have it an hour.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a very
Honestly, this
Fair,
is
fair.
amazing, and I hate to stop you.
No. It's
That's wonderful,
Yeah.
and it was so good that we also had Kaveh Ahmad joining us, right? So Cameron Cross, Kaveh Ahmad, Alexandra Hoffmann. What a really harmony. Wonderful. No more questions. And you know what? Even if we had questions, here's what I should say. So Dr. Hoffmann has generously offered, to make her email address available. So if there are any further questions, both here in the audience here and also among the audience joining us on Zoom, feel free to send it to her email address, which I think you're making that email available, right? And also very quickly, I just have a favor request, especially for those who are joining us on Zoom. Our colleagues will just provide a link, and that's a link to a survey. If you could take a couple of minutes and just take that survey, it would be wonderful, because it helps us to just make our series better and better. So thanks for your feedback. And I guess, Stefania, I'll have you wrap it up. Thank you.
You could have wrapped it up.
No,
I want to
please.
just say thank you
You
to
do a
all of
better
you.
job.
No, I mean, for me, I am also medievalist of Japanese poetry, and it just makes me want to get back into the classroom, both as your student and to be part of these conversations. Really very wonderful. And I learned so much. So, but it is it looked like 10 p.m. when we arrived at 6, and now it feels like it's 2 in the morning. So I want to thank you all for coming and staying and joining us. And I'm so thrilled to have Alexandra as a colleague and to have this opportunity to come together. And I look forward to more as part of the lecture series that you and Mustafa are organizing this year. So I personally and many here would look forward to seeing you at other events at the Alireza Ahmadian lecture series. And there's a website, and I don't, yeah, there we go. Nope, that's not, okay. Nope, that's not, there's a link, there's a website. Join us again, and thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you. I just wanted to extend a brief thank you to all the people who have helped organize this lecture today and who've been here. Cameron Cross, for one, Stefania, Mustafa, and also Winnie and Gianna, who have been here as support. Thank you so much. And thank you again for coming.